afternoon. We're going to be starting in about 2 minutes. I just wanted to let everyone know so you can take your seats, and we'll get started very shortly. We ready? Welcome. Good afternoon. On behalf of the Friends of Harriet Beecher Stowe House, we respectfully acknowledge that the ground on which we stand are the traditional Miami and Shawnee lands. We extend our esteem and gratitude to the indigenous people who call this place home. Welcome to the Harriet Beecher Stowe House Lecture Series, here in person and online. I'm Christina Hartlieb, Executive Director of the Harriet Beecher Stowe House. Our sponsors for the 2023 lecture series are longtime Friends member Alan Bernard, the Friends of Harriet Beecher Stowe House Board, and the First Unitarian Church. We thank them all for their support. Thanks also to our volunteers and board members who are running the AV equipment and who checked you in. We're bringing you today's lecture free, but please feel free to support our mission financially if you're able to. While members of the Friends of Harriet Beecher Stowe House enjoy these programs without an extra charge, if you are not a member yet, we do have our donation box out front if you are able to contribute. We'll have the presentation, and then we'll do a question and answer time. Today's presenter is Dr. Elizabeth Yuko. She's an award-winning journalist and bioethicist and an adjunct professor of ethics at Fordham University. She has been published in the New York Times, the Washington Post, Rolling Stone, The Atlantic, CNN, Teen Vogue. The list goes on and on and on. Ms. Magazine, Venture, Popular Mechanics, Salon, and Refinery 29, among others. She's currently serving a fellowship at the Lloyd Library here in Cincinnati. So let's welcome Elizabeth Yuko.
Well, it's yellow. Out and proud. Hi, how are you doing today? Thank you so much, Christina, for the wonderful welcome, and thank you to everyone who came out today and is joining us online. As Christina mentioned, my name is Elizabeth Yuko, and I am a bioethicist and journalist. And some of the work that I do is at the intersection of health and design and health and architecture. And through this work, I came across the work of Catherine Beecher. And I, of course, was familiar with Harriet's work, but once I started reading Catherine's books and other writings, I just became fascinated by her advice a long time before people were giving this type of household advice. And so, yeah, I'll be talking a little bit about health and design and singling out some of her contributions. So, sorry. I'm like, I just see myself. There we are. So when we're talking about the sanitary movement or the period of time between when germ theory is being developed and when it became generally well accepted, the sanitary campaigners and reformers used a phrase, corpus sanum in donum sano, a healthy body and a healthy house. And I think especially Catherine Beecher used that as a motto to kind of explain some of the work that she was doing around design, especially in homes. So to give you a general idea about the time period we're going to talk about today, this is just a quick look at it, although we will be going, a little bit outside of this. We'll be generally looking at about a 100-year period between the 1830s and the 1930s. So during this period, we had the Second Industrial Revolution, which impacted Cincinnati a lot. As you all know, cities built up thanks to factory jobs. Sorry, I didn't think it would be getting our eyes checked on the list of things to do. There were often poor working conditions, and oh my goodness, okay. Oh, thank you. This is much easier than thank you for attending my eye exam. I failed. There we go. So the mechanization of printing also was happening at the same time. So in addition to technology developing, so was the media, and so word was spreading much faster. And the mass production of goods. So people had stuff before, more so than they had at any point before. And that was a big development. And also there was something called the servant problem, which we'll discuss in a little bit. Part of that time period involved urbanization, both from the Great Migration, people migrating from the southern parts of the United States to more northern cities, including Cincinnati, and that caused the cities to swell, as well as immigration from other countries. And at the same time, when we have a confluence of these conditions, and especially in cities, the crowded living conditions, there are issues with both public and private health. So all things that we'll be talking about in the background. Next. So before antibiotics and vaccines and other types of medications, homes were the final defense against infectious disease. And in this time period that I mentioned, there were many epidemics, a few cholera epidemics, of course the influenza of 1819 to 1920, tuberculosis was a big problem, and so when, especially the woman of the house who was charged with caring for the moral character of the family, as well as their health, their spirituality, their, in some cases, education, they were also tasked with keeping them healthy. And so using the home as this final barrier to protect your family is something that a lot of the sanitary reformers, including Catherine Beecher, although I don't know if she would consider herself a sanitary reformer in that sense, was something that they really leaned into, using design effectively. So the focus on hygiene and sanitation inside the home predates germ theory. And we'll see in a second, germ theory was not a singular event like, boom, we know about germs. It was a process that took many decades for scientists to uncover, and then also for the dissemination of that to the general public. And so a lot of these policies came into place before this was a widely accepted aspect of health and science and medicine. So something else. Next. So before germ theory, the most widely accepted belief as to how diseases transmit was called the miasma theory, which involves bad smells or vapors making you sick, essentially. So the place where you empty your chamber pots in the morning, the outhouses, just any garbage on the street, anything that smelled bad could potentially make you sick. And so a lot of especially the early innovations of Catherine's time, happened before people fully understood that there were these invisible things that made you sick. But because they thought it was this bad, foul air or vapors that was causing illness, there was a very heavy focus on ventilation. So getting the bad air out and clean, fresh, pure air in. So a very quick rundown of the development of germ theory, not in any way comprehensive. I'm going to start in 1832 with another local resident, Henry Boyd, a cabinet and furniture maker, who proposed that cholera was transmitted by something in the water. And the prominent doctor at the time, I want to say Dr. Drake, very much thought it was something in the air. And so Henry Boyd proposed boiling water before you drink it. And he did that, and he survived, I think, most of the big cholera epidemics of his lifetime. And, but he was a Black American. He was born into slavery and purchased his freedom and moved to Cincinnati from Kentucky. And people didn't really listen to him, unfortunately. But when you look at, someone who's not very well known, especially in the field of, bacteriology, that he was a little bit, he knew what he was talking about before a lot of the big names. Kind of breezing through the rest, Ignaz Semmelweis, he was a Hungarian obstetrician. He noticed that he worked in 2 hospitals. In one hospital, doctors worked on corpses, doing autopsies, and then without washing their hands would go deliver a baby. And there were very high rates of childbed fever or puerperal fever in that hospital, whereas the other hospital, the doctors washed their hands between cadavers and childbirth. And it worked really well. As it turns out, corpse germs aren't great for delivering a baby, both for the child and for the mother, especially, lots of exposed areas. And so he suggested that the people in the hospital, the doctors, wash their hands. But at the time, a bloody doctor outfit was considered a badge of honor. It showed that you were working, you knew what you were doing. And so to wash that blood off of you, you're kind of, washing away your credibility. Why would you wash your hands? And so things didn't end so well for him either. He ended up spending his final years in a psychiatric hospital. John Snow's probably one of the better known on this list. He was in London, noticed that everybody in a particular neighborhood in London was getting sick and some dying, who were all using the same water pump. And so he mapped out the cholera deaths and traced them to this Broad Street pump. And that was really one of the first times that people started paying attention to the possibility that not all diseases are caused by this bad vapor. Louis Pasteur, people are probably familiar with him, while messing around with food and food spoilage. He theorized that there are invisible bacteria that cause infection and disease. A few years later, Joseph Lister, a British surgeon, found that when he sterilized the surgical equipment before surgery and also kind of kept the surgical wounds clean, the patients died much less frequently than when he didn't and used, non-cleaned instruments. And so that was a big contribution. A few years later, a product was invented that was named in his honor, called Listerine, which was used for a variety of things and eventually mouthwash. That's a different story. Finally, Robert Koch is one of the other big names in the field who identified that different diseases are caused by different germs. So it's not just one bad germ, it's one that causes tuberculosis, one that causes cholera, and that would then help people figure out how to treat it. So, quick rundown, and to put this into context, we'll talk about this in a second. Catherine Beecher's first book came out, her first book, on domestic economy, domestic science, came out in 1841. So she is pretty early on. And not that she was saying that germs existed, but as we'll see, a lot of her practices are in line with what people would recommend later on. So how did germ theory spread? It was a long process and an involved process, but by and large, it was up to women to educate their own family members and households on the spread of illness, whether it was the miasma theory or later on once germ theory was more widely accepted and understood. There was an idea that women were divinely appointed for this position, and that this was kind of within their realm, their sphere, to educate their husbands and children on this. And so, if you can imagine, we had experience the past 3 years with trying to convince people who weren't necessarily convinced about certain medical things that, like, a pandemic exists or a vaccine is helpful. And imagine, so that, as we saw, was not a picnic. So imagine trying to convince people that these invisible or teeny tiny little monsters made you sick. And miasma theory might seem weird today, but at least a smell was tangible, whereas germs were kind of just, there was nothing solid about them. You just had to kind of believe that they were there. And so, so that was not really an easy task. And, when you're teaching your kids, okay, we have to wash your hands and get all the dirt under your fingernails because germs could live in there. Like, imagine having to convince people that's, as a journalist, I sort of tried recently, and it was not easy. So you had books like this one called Women, Plumbers, and Doctors. This is from the later half of the century, 1885, and the author's mission was for women and plumbers to work together in household sanitation so that doctors aren't necessary. So, if women know how the plumbing of a house works, where the water comes from, how to keep the water clean, how to keep households well ventilated, then ideally their family would not have as much medical difficulty. So, yes. So it was an obligation for women to not just convince their family members about hygiene and sanitation, but it also, I see it as a form of control that, you had this influence over not just, first your household, but then, they go out into the community. And so it is, I think, a position of power, and that's not my idea, that's Catherine's idea, I'm agreeing with her. But yes, we'll put a little dedication of one of her books up later that explains that. Yep. So separate spheres is this idea, it's associated with the Victorian era, but it was in place ahead of that as well, that there are two parts of society, the home and everything else. And so women were in charge of the home. We, made the rules, we set the budgets, we, were in charge of household repairs, and men got to be literally everywhere else. Work, bars, we were allowed to go to church, and maybe sometimes the theater as time wore on, but yeah, and so a lot of these domestic scientists and sanitary reformers really kind of latched onto that, like Catherine, saying, okay, well, if this is our sphere, we're gonna take control over it, and you're gonna listen to me, and you will take your boots off when you walk into the house. So yeah, that was another aspect of it. It also coincided, or it all was part of the same thing, with what was known as the sanitary craze. It's not referred to, this is not a term you hear a lot looking back in history, but it was applied during the same rough time period between mid-1800s and mid-1900s. This idea that women be crazy, we love to clean, and we're gonna harass you until you get clean. Referring to doing this household labor to keep your family safe, because women were doing it, it was not taken as seriously and was referred to in the media by male architects and other members of society as the sanitary craze or the sanitary fad. Suggesting that it would go away and that women would eventually calm down with all of this cleanliness talk and get on with their lives. And to me, this reeks of hysteria again, so that something made up that is just used to discredit women. This obviously wore off as germ theory became more widely accepted and people realized that, yeah, there is a connection between cleanliness and health, and women know what they're talking about. So it cooled down a little bit, but there was an article in the New York Times in 1925 about a chain of restaurants that used white subway tile in the dining room to give the impression that diners were basically eating in a hospital, somewhere very sterile. And at a time when foodborne illness was huge, that was a very good marketing technique. And in that article, the New York Times referred to the public's lust for sanitation, which I love. It was kind of used tongue-in-cheek, but also like, yeah, we really want to make sure places are clean. You might notice some products, including Sanitas wall covering, that's a popular name, several brands use that, that use parts of the words of sanitary, hygiene, hygienic, disinfection, germs in the name to make it very clear that these are products that are intended to get rid of germs. And as people were exposed to that type of advertising and just seeing these names and these products out in public, people became a little bit more used to seeing it, and that kind of, helped with wider acceptance. But yeah, it's hard to think back to when that was something you had to convince people of. So where was the information that women were getting and using to teach their family about hygiene and sanitation? A lot of it came from these household manuals, either referred to as domestic science. Catherine Beecher called it domestic economy. Household management was also used. Domestic medicine was more exactly what it sounds like, taking care of family members within a sick room or a sick space, and housekeeping. And so here's a selection of a few of the titles that came out at this time, including, so Treatise of Domestic Economy, that was Catherine Beecher's book from 1841 and then revised. Then we have in the red, What Women Should Know, a woman's book about women. Women's Book of Health, you might recognize the black cover in the middle, Vitalogy, that was used as a Pearl Jam cover in the 90s. And so it's a really interesting book with some great illustrations. Women would get these books as wedding gifts from their mother-in-law to make sure that their precious baby was taken care of. And so these books, like Catherine's, were constantly referenced in households. You know, there was no Google to look things up really quick if you needed to figure out how to get a chocolate stain out of your white carpet. You turned to the advice in these books, which also covered a range of other topics, from taking care of your family to mixing up medicines if you needed it, to making your own cleaning products, but recipes as well. But they were very important parts of these households at this time. So, as a kind of caveat, the domestic science movement was started by a bunch of, and also the early sanitary reformers and campaigners were largely white, middle, and upper class women. And so the idea was to legitimize women's work by adding a scientific component. So rather than just putting a pinch of something and a dash of something when you're cooking, you're gonna have standardized measurements. And there's so much that the domestic science movement contributed that we still use today. And I just want to take a moment to acknowledge that this is the type of work that women of color and women of other classes had been doing for a very long time. And it was never referred to as science when they did it. It was never seen as legitimate work. It was seen more as labor or, you know, work that was beneath people. But all of a sudden, white ladies do it, we call it science. So yeah, most characters, as you know from this time period, kind of have some complex backgrounds, and so that's kind of something to keep in mind with this movement as well. The servant problem. So how did these wealthy white ladies end up in the kitchen and doing housework in the first place? Well, that was something that was termed the servant problem. And essentially what it was that with the Industrial Revolution and the abundance of factory jobs and other types of work, people who may have done domestic labor normally decided to get work in factories. And, you know, we look at 19th and early 20th century working conditions and think, like, doesn't sound great, but you at least had a day off. You know, you weren't at someone's beck and call 24 hours a day. You know, you might have to do one job as opposed to, you know, being a girl of all work. And so these heads of households, these ladies couldn't figure out why someone might pick a factory job or another job over being their domestic servant. And so that was what was referred to as the servant problem, that essentially you can't get good help these days. So there was this, that's part of what helped, or what prompted them to try to legitimize this work, is because they were doing it more themselves. And some households did still have a servant, but they cut down from maybe a larger staff to one person. And so, yeah, it was kind of a shift in who was working and doing which jobs in society. So you had people who didn't necessarily have training in how to cook, how to clean, how to take care of people, who were doing it for the first time. And this is something that Catherine addresses in most of her domestic economy books, if not all of them, is readers who may be doing this work for the very first time in their lives. So, acknowledging that not everyone is coming from the same place. And this is just another example of the servant problem. This is relatively recent, from 1919. This is a catalog of homes that were designed to solve the servant problem. So rather than being bigger, sprawling estates, they were a little bit more compact. There was less to clean. There may not be, a large servant quarter section of the house. But once people in the middle and upper classes had to do that type of work themselves, they wanted to make it easier on themselves. So that was where homes and designs like that came in. Yes, so also in the sanitary movement, it was one of those situations where good was done, but there are repercussions that we are still living with today. Especially in cities, you had, I'm hoping, well-meaning white ladies going into neighborhoods of immigrants, of Black Americans, of anybody in the margins of society, and teaching them these sanitary and hygienic ways, and in the process saying, these are the people who are making us sick. The immigrant classes are the ones who are spreading disease and spreading these germs around. And so if we go in and Americanize them and teach them how to be clean, they will, society will be better. And at the same time, there was a moral component to this, because people thought that crowded tenements also bred criminals. And so that was kind of part of their campaign, and thought about social determinants of health, or systemic racism or xenophobia, nothing like that. But it was kind of, we're here to save you. And good things resulted from it: public baths, public restrooms, other very necessary parts of society that are still with us today. But we also are still living with the legacy of the idea that if an epidemic starts, we look to immigrant populations first. We saw that very recently, unfortunately. So it's, or that certain groups are less clean than others, and that has roots in, it has roots in a lot of things, but that you can trace some of that back to the sanitary movement in the early days. So part of the sanitary movement was setting up hygiene classes for students in these largely immigrant or Black neighborhoods. And this is from a textbook for elementary school students from 1910 called Primer of Hygiene. And this is how they present the information about going out in public when you're contagious with an illness. So a little gun heavy there. But basically saying you wouldn't walk into a room and kill your friends, but if you are going somewhere when you're sick and contagious, you're doing something similar. So the idea was for the children in these classes to go home and pass this information along to their parents and help Americanize them as well. I don't know if I would have gone with this particular messaging, but I was not writing textbooks at the time. So quick focus on Catherine Esther Beecher. I will give the caveat, I am not her biographer. I don't know much about her actual life. I am mostly familiar with her writing on domestic economy. And so here are a list of some of the books that I refer to the most, from the first one from 1841 through Miss Beecher's domestic receipt book is also very good. She has a lot of recipes for not just food, but also home cleaning products, herbal remedies, things like that. The American Woman's Home, she wrote with Harriet Beecher Stowe, and that's the inside page on the right there, and her 1873 book, Housekeeper and Healthkeeper, I think is a catchy title, and also has a lot of really interesting information relevant to what we're talking about now. So what made Catherine Beecher's work stand out? Something I've been talking a little bit about already. So her book was the first book on domestic science, domestic economy, housekeeping, written specifically for an American audience. So up until that point, we had just been importing books from England and using those. And I mean, a lot of things translated, but not everything did. And so that was a big deal when Catherine's book came out. She also wrote for women of varying classes. So as I mentioned, she wrote for women who had never emptied a chamber pot in her life, to members of the working class, and wrote about how to decorate your parlor in a very economical way using things like tree branches. And so that also set her work apart, looking at it in the context of a lot of the other literature like hers at the time. She was single and child-free, which is not necessarily the same background as a lot of the other authors of these books who were married, frequently referred to Mrs. So-and-so with her husband's name. And so Catherine does specify in the books that she learned what she learned from a series of housekeepers that they had in their house, and by educating herself. So she addresses that right from the beginning, like, I might not be married and have kids, but here's how I learned what I learned, which, is smart. Shows them the receipts. Could you go back to the last one? Thanks. Yeah, this is perfect. She also wrote from a stance. So it wasn't just, here are a bunch of receipts, here's how to clean your stove. She was writing from the stance of creating a Christian home, creating a moral home, and creating a healthy home, which she saw as all going hand in hand. And also, she wrote pretty forcefully, I think, about, a woman's place being in the home, which, looking back, is, it is what it is, but really taking control of that and saying, if your husband wants a parlor with this, but you know that you need a better water delivery supply or set up within your house, you do what you need to do and, go against his wishes, and you're going to be in charge of designing the house anyway. And so, that was a little bit different than some of the other work. She also included both plans for interior and exterior architecture, like actual plans that you can see. And, this is someone without formal training in architecture, and, looking back now, it makes sense. And it's not just one plan, it's plans for a Gothic cottage, a 2-story farmhouse. So that was something that was not usually included in these domestic manuals. And then, yes, it was incredibly comprehensive. She covered everything from caring for domestic animals, plants, gardening, kids, sick people, the whole shebang. And she also credits other people's work when it's not her own, which is, if you've ever worked in academia and had people taking your credit for your work, then you know what a big deal that is. But if she said, you know what, I read Florence Nightingale's book, and that's where I learned this, she credits other people's work. I don't know, I appreciate that. And she also wrote about mental health. So you could read that little quote there. There is such an intimate connection between the body and mind that the health of one cannot be preserved without a proper care of the other. And we're not there yet now. This was in the 1800s. So, sorry, I meant to say the dedication to the American Women's Home, the one she co-wrote with Harriet, was to the women of America, in whose hands rest the real destinies of the Republic. as molded by the early training and preserved amid the my eyes, influences of home. This volume is affectionately inscribed. So yeah, I mean, calling out the power within the household and within the Republic. So yeah, thanks. This was also a continuation of her work in education, which is what she was, known for, starting a school for girls in Hartford, Connecticut, and essentially said that men receive formal schooling and formal training and exams to become their profession, and there's not the equivalent for women. And so it's harder for people to take us seriously if, these are all just casual things passed down from one person to another, as opposed to, more formal training. And that is one of the things she was trying to accomplish with her books, was to make this more legitimate. Within the Beecher family and branches, it wasn't just Catherine who was writing about domestic science and housekeeping topics. So, as I mentioned, Harriet co-wrote 2 books with her, at least, The American Woman's Home and The New Housekeeper's Manual. And then this, I only found out, this is hot off the presses, 150 years too late, within the past month during my fellowship at the Lloyd Library, Henry Ward Beecher's wife, Eunice White Beecher, also wrote about housekeeping. And sometimes she wrote as Mrs. Henry Ward Beecher, sometimes as a preacher's wife. I don't know if she's I don't think I came across anything with her full name, but I gave it to her. So yeah, there's a lot of household advice going on, or coming out of the women of the family. And we don't have to take the time to read this, but this is in the Vitalogy. So this was in the Pearl Jam album book. Harriet Beecher Stowe wrote this. It's like a 2-pager on advice to children and young people. So she also contributed solo to another kind of housekeeping and healthkeeping manual. So how do you use your home to stay healthy? That's one of Catherine's drawings there. So broadly speaking, it falls into a few different categories: ventilation, sunlight, room placement and layout, interior and exterior architecture, keeping it clean and tidy, and appropriate furniture and decor. And kind of moving forward, I will be not just referring to Catherine, but other people within the space as well. So get a lot of information. So as I explained, ventilation, it was important both pre and post any talk of germs, because of the idea that you had to move the bad, stale air out, and that when we breathed, people believed that we exhaled carbonic acid, and it was in such high concentrations that if there was no ventilation, it was enough to poison ourselves in our sleep. And so that's why ventilation, especially in bedrooms, was very important, and something that every book from authors of this period I've read puts above everything else, and Catherine's work is no exception. And that's an example of the ground floor of one of her house plans. So you could see there's a lot of windows, a lot of opportunities for cross ventilation, and keeping a breeze going. Going hand in hand with ventilation is sunlight. So people believed that exposure to sunlight made you healthier, made you stronger, and better able to fight off illness if you were to get sick. Authors referred to its health-giving properties, its restorative influence. One even referred to the moral influence of sunlight, citing, people who are living in dungeons and dark alleys being, nefarious characters. But if someone is, exposed to sunlight, then they're going to be upstanding citizens. So that idea was put into the home as well. And later on came the idea that sunlight had disinfecting properties, but that was more of an afterthought at this point, but something that has since been confirmed. So breaking from Catherine for a second, here's some pictures from another Cincinnati area landmark, the Whitewater Shaker Village, which I had the opportunity to visit a few weeks ago. Ventilation and sunlight were very important to Shakers as they built their dwellings and other community buildings. If you're not familiar with the Shakers, they were a utopian religious community. They were celibate, so that kind of puts an endpoint to, you have to get a lot of new members. And, but anyway, they were also very ahead of their time. A lot of these early utopian communities had very interesting design choices because you were living with a lot of people. And so you wanted to make everything as healthy as possible. And so ventilation and sunlight is something that, that the Shakers believed in. Interior windows was something that it's hard to kind of see in the picture on the right. The window you see there, it opens into a stairwell, so it's still inside, but otherwise that room would not have as much sunlight as you see there. And, or a device like you see in the middle with the red window opener thing where you can have hold the window open to different heights. So you see the interior window configuration in a lot of tenements, especially after tenement laws were passed and every room had to have some type of sunlight. But they were some of the early pioneers in this field as well. And also local, and go visit if you haven't already. People were not kidding about ventilation. This is a sign from, I believe, the trolley from the flu pandemic of 1918, urging Cincinnatians to keep their bedroom windows open to prevent all of these diseases. So that truly was a recommendation, and I mean, it still is. Ventilation is something that has been coming up a lot in the past 3 years in terms of the pandemic and keeping people safe at school, at work, etc. So, yeah. Safe and accessible water is another big component, which I'm not going to get into as much here because I have failed the women of the domestic science movement, and I am not an expert plumber. But the drawing on the left is Catherine Beecher's configuration for water, and this is actually posted in the house in Walnut Hills. So you could see how she planned on, or how she got running water at an early time. And the picture on the right is from a Shaker community in Kentucky, and that is the water pump house and a bathhouse next door, so which was supplying running water to the village at a time before that was really a thing. But yes, making sure that water was not just accessible, but away from cesspools or creeks where other things were dumped. So you want to make sure you have a safe water source. So these are some of Catherine's suggestions for putting together a parlor that will be as healthy as possible for you and your family. Of course, proper ventilation, especially with gas burners. Plain white muslin, she thinks is perfect for curtains. It lets sunlight in. They're not heavy like drapes. They're easy to clean. They're easy to dry. And they really make a room. What else? Oh yeah, candle and fire screens for people with weak eyes. I need them. And then something very specific, that if someone was seated at a table and their back was facing the fire, that there needed to be a shield between their back and the fireplace, because having a hot back could be bad for your entire system. Parlor plants not surprising given the era. This became even more popular as, later Victorian era wore on. Keeping flies out, she suggested putting wire netting on windows and doors, so screening them, to keep the disease-breeding flies out. She cautions people, do not shut out the sun, because, at the time, parlors might have a tendency to be kind of darker, heavier places, and nope, not great. And then she also recommends to have, if you have the space, a movable screen in your parlor if you have kind of a larger open area, because that gives you the ability to create additional rooms if necessary. So that could be an office space, that could be a guest room, that could be a sick room, that could be an additional bedroom. So some of her tips. Her instructions on creating a kitchen are, I think, especially fascinating. This is one of the drawings that come with it. The walls, she says, should be whitewashed, which was also pretty common at the era to allow you to see the dirt and know when to clean them. Whitewash also was thought to be anti-disease, antimicrobial. Can't speak to the science on that, but that was a belief. The floor should either be painted or made or have oilcloth on top of it, like an early form of linoleum, as opposed to hardwood, because that made it smoother and easier to clean. Talked about a type of crockery and ironware to have. There should be a clock, so meals were served on time. She talked about the importance of a storeroom or a pantry for being able to keep the items that don't go in the cellar, and was very specific about the cellar being whitewashed and perfectly dry so that the food in there does not spoil. And yeah, you can kind of see her setup of the kitchen with flour, cooking area, the drain, the sink, closets, a stove, the cellar door. It's all meant to cut down on walking and making the kitchen as efficient as possible. This is another one of her drawings of kitchen storage, which I think I saw on Pinterest last week. I mean, it looks like something you would find today. So it looks busy, possibly, but everything is uncluttered and ordered, and you know exactly where things are, which also helps with the efficiency. Utensils and cloths, which she recommends hanging them on hooks, again, so they're visible and accessible. This is something else the Shakers did with their pegs along the wall. Yes, minimizing the number of steps. We count our steps today, make sure we get up to a certain amount, but Catherine and other domestic scientists were all about reducing them. And multiple windows, as many as you can, to let air in, especially because you're gonna be cooking and it will be hot. And if you burn something, you wanna be able to let out the air. Walls, so this is in general. When you're making things about making your home healthier, there was a shift away from wallpaper for two reasons. First, wallpaper was damp. It would absorb any moisture, and dampness was thought to breed disease and illness. Also, a very popular color of wallpaper was arsenic or Paris green, which was colored using arsenic. And so the book you see there in green, Shadows of the Walls of Death, came out in 1874, and warned people to not put arsenic wallpaper up. And so the healthy or preferred sanitary method was painting or using some of these other relatively, not short-lived products, but types of smoother plasters, or the product that was just up there now, I believe is made of gypsum. And yeah, the idea was to create a hard, easy to clean surface that did not get damp. You can see here, it's an ad from the 1880s on a sanitary paint I mean, there's nothing specifically sanitary about it. It was just the fact that it was paint. And the butler here, I guess, is telling the sick man that sanitary muraline on the walls is the only thing that will help you. So, yeah. And then also on the walls, especially in bathrooms and also in kitchens, you saw a lot of tile. First, white tile, again, so dirt would show up, you would know where to clean, and then also kind of this gleaming white bathroom was a status symbol and seen as, you know, you have a very sanitary home and you keep it clean. So that was another moving away from wallpaper and moving away from wood on the wall. Floors, the same. So while hardwood was acceptable in halls, in parlors, bedrooms, when we're talking about the kitchen or the bathroom or any utility type room, there was a shift away from the hardwood because the crevices were thought to be able to harbor the dust, the germs, and the disease. So linoleum, before linoleum, there was, as Catherine suggested, painting the floors or oilcloth. Then linoleum became the flooring of the sanitary movement. And some of my favorite is the linoleum that was meant to look like a carpet or a rug. And so that is a page from, I think, a 1919 Armstrong catalog. And then the picture in the middle is from a house in upstate New York that I took a picture of the floor in because I thought it was pretty. Wall-to-wall carpeting at this point was not recommended. People did have it. Catherine does talk about it in her books and suggests putting a layer of straw underneath the carpet for a few different reasons, which of course had to be switched out all the time. But the safer version, if you wanted something soft, was a rug, an area rug that was easy to clean. First beating it and eventually with sweepers. These are also other examples of ways people coated their walls to, or floors, excuse me, to make them more sanitary. So you have the unfortunately named Japalac sanitary floors, which is like a hard type of varnish. When I was looking for this ad, I saw you could buy it still today under the same name. Which I was like, okay. Yes, the idea here is, yes, your floors are still wood, but we've created this perfectly smooth surface. And then waxes also. It wasn't really solving the problem, but everyone kind of jumped on the on the sanitary bandwagon. So Victory Sanitary wax. So the bathroom, which in Catherine's time was not the modern bathroom that we know, or not in her time when she first started writing, that we know today. But a very short version, because I know I'm running out of time. Are we running out of time? Yeah. Okay, sorry. Sorry, could you put the last slide back for a second? Yes, okay, so how did houses go from no plumbing at all to bathrooms? First, you had a chamber. Sorry, I should not point to that sacred bowl. You had a chamber pot, that would be emptied. Then to make it blend in a little bit more, you often had a commode that was a wooden box or a full chair to hide it. The first plumbing that typically went into the home was a small sink, either in the kitchen or in the corner of a bedroom to allow people to wash up without having to go outside. But at this point, because miasma theory was still dominant, people were afraid of putting toilets in their home because they were afraid that the sewer gases would come up through the toilet and make them sick. So rich people still, at that point, wanted to go use, well, no one wants to use an outhouse in the middle of the night, but opted to use an outhouse in the middle of the night as opposed to, installing a bathroom and indoor plumbing. Eventually that changed, but when bathrooms were created, typically in rooms that already existed, unless it was a home that was newly built, everything was encased in wood, which is what you see in the top picture there. So people wanted it to look not like a bathroom. They wanted you not to know where you were. You just open a lid and hope for the best. And, everything was encased in this dark, ornate wood, hard to clean, but, hiding things away in the bathtub, cast iron and everything, but within a wooden casing. So that was 1870. This is a catalog for the Standard Sanitary Manufacturing Company, now known as American Standard. So this is their own ad from 1912 saying, here's the bathroom from 1875, look how outdated it is. And then here's our gleaming new one where the fixtures were opened, the wood was taken off. The fixtures were allowed to look like bathroom fixtures, which were easier to clean. There was, the white enamel, white porcelain used, covering all of the fixtures, making them easy to clean, gone with the wood, in with the white tile and white floors and everything. So the idea being making everything as hygienic and sanitary and easy to clean as possible. And that's, when you look at that difference in quite a short time span, and then, the 1912 till now, we haven't really changed that much. A few things that you might notice, a few extra fixtures in the 1912. So you had the separate bathtub and shower, which people still have, obviously. You also had a foot bath in the front right, a sitz bath as well, back right, and there's not one here, but some of the early bathroom ads from this era have a second small sink specifically for brushing your teeth. So before there were standard bathroom fixtures, the plumbing companies basically tried to sell you anything, and we kind of just ended up, people made bathrooms based on the size room they had, but we don't design bathrooms now to make room for a sitz bath or a bidet, or a standalone bidet, or a second sink for toothbrushing. So it's kind of interesting to see what made the cut and what didn't. Here's an example of a kind of bathroom in flux. This is from the same house in upstate New York. So you have, those are two separate bathrooms, but same house. So you have wood floors here, that would have typically been updated. Wood walls also would have been updated. You think you see white tile, but what you're actually seeing is tin, like the kind you'd have on a ceiling, which is textured. So it's white, so half credit, I guess, but not easier to clean. It was very interesting to kind of see this bathroom, and that's still the bathroom. It has not been updated since then. So, because you don't really see a lot of examples of Victorian era bathrooms because most of them have been remodeled. So that was just a quick look. The powder room is also in homes largely for health purposes. This ad, it's 1947, it's much later, but I couldn't find a good powder room ad. But the idea of the powder room became popular in the 1918 influenza, when people were suspicious of other people, you wanted to keep your family safe, and so these larger homes with middle-class, upper-class households opted to build a second small, half bath on the ground floor, typically near the front door, so when the ice delivery person or the cold delivery person came, if they needed to wash their hands, if they needed to use the restroom, they could do so on the ground floor near the door and not go upstairs into the family's special area. So that was for cleanliness purposes, privacy, and then also to keep any germs contained, so that we can thank disease for the powder room, at least partially. Another thing we saw in bathrooms a lot, especially in the latter half of the 1800s, were these fixtures that would not have looked out of place in a hospital or a lab. Nickel plating became popular, single castings, which were easy to clean, and this was, one of the brands here was called Sanola, So, really leaning into the hospital germ lab theme there. Okay, bedrooms. Bedroom hygiene and sanitary concerns. So as I mentioned, people were very concerned about your health while you were sleeping and the air. First, because of the potentially poisoning yourself with your own exhaling, but also because people thought for a long time that night air was dangerous and unhealthy for you. A lot of things, night was mysterious, it was dark. That's when the night soil men came to collect what you dumped out of your chamber pots. It was night. People were a little afraid of it. And thought it made you sick, so they were hesitant to open the windows, even though it might save them from poisoning themselves in their sleep from their own breath. It's a whole journey. Catherine Beecher was one of the earlier people to say, no, night air is not going to make you sick. Please open your windows at night. Florence Nightingale was another who said that, and she claimed actually that night air was healthier than day air because you don't have the pollution from factories, from soot from stoves running, the dust and debris from the street from horses. So yes, so when planning a bedroom, ventilation was very important. People also wanted the room not to make you sick, so being able to clean as much as possible. And much further down the list was sleep quality. So finally, kind of at this time, those who could afford it were considering how they're sleeping and getting a good night's sleep. And you're seeing sleep linked to health as well. And so the idea of having a proper bed to get rest in to improve your health was also something that that Catherine discussed, as well as other writers of the era. Also in bedrooms, we're back at Whitewater, Shaker Village here. Everything needed to be cleaned easily, and both for the Shakers, in Catherine's works as well as for other authors. And so you don't want your bedrooms to be cluttered, and if you have stuff, you want to be able to move it out as quickly and easy as possible. So that's how you have, actually the one on the picture on the right is from Massachusetts, not Ohio, but the one on the left is from Ohio. So they had these peg rails where you could hang chairs, not a whole bed, but smaller pieces of furniture while you were cleaning, and so that was also important when planning a bedroom. The bedroom and sick room placement, this is one of Catherine's drawings here on the right. Ideally would be on the second floor if that's at all possible. It's not, obviously, if someone lives in an apartment or a one-floor home, but there's a few reasons for this. One, that it's quiet. It allows you to rest, whether you're sick or sleeping overnight. You're away from the commotion happening in the rest of the house. It gives you some privacy when you're sleeping or sick or whatever else you want to do in the privacy of your own bedroom. It isolates you, again, if you're sick, but also if you are sleeping. And probably most importantly, it keeps you lifted from the street dust and the ground level pollution. Because I think we forget about, before cars, when horses were used as a main mode of transportation, and they went to the bathroom on the street, that would dry up. When that dried up, it turned into dust. And so street dust and street dirt, it's not just like, dirt you'd find in a garden. It's horse poop dirt. It's not great. It's not something you want in your home. It's not something you want in your skirt. So at least being able to sleep on higher floors was something that that a lot of the writers of the era recommended, if possible. Mattresses. So those who could afford better mattresses, this is before industrialization, had ones that were filled with horsehair, cotton, or rags. The lower end were filled with straw, hay, moss, crop debris, leaves, sometimes rags, but the really gross rags. And so this is something Catherine addresses. And this is 1873, so at this point there are already mass-produced mattresses, but she, again, is writing to kind of inclusively of different classes, and says that if you're going to make your own mattress, that oat straw is preferable to wheat or rye straw because it is softer and healthier. So should you need to make a mattress later, you know what to do. And that drawing is her model of a mattress with the cover and how to stuff it. And then, yeah, spring coil mattresses became mass-produced a little bit later, but that was still something that was more of a luxury for quite a while. Well, we talked about Henry Boyd before from the, boiling water to prevent cholera, or boiling water before you drink it during a cholera epidemic. He was a cabinet maker and a furniture maker. He is best known probably for his Boyd bedstead, which is pictured there. And the many beds at that point were the ones with kind of a crisscross of rope at the bottom that were tightened. And that's where the expression sleep tight comes from, because if they were not tight, you would probably roll to the middle of the bed. It would be uncomfortable. You wouldn't get good rest. And so his bedstead kept the ropes tight and gave people a better night's sleep. It was made of wood, but it, go to the next slide. It fit together in little pieces. So it was easy to clean and allegedly vermin-proof. So there weren't any little hidey holes for pests to hide in. So that was a bed innovation from Cincinnati. So what was wrong with wooden beds? Because they were a big target amongst health reformers. As we mentioned, the looseness of the joints, people believed that various vermin could live in them. The porosity and cracks made them impossible to clean and thoroughly disinfect. And also, wooden furniture tended to be very heavy and hard to move when you were cleaning. So the solution was sanitary furniture for the bedroom, and then there was also sanitary furniture for the rest of the home as well. Typically made of metal. Some of the ads will specifically say brass bed. Brass beds were probably the most popular. There were also iron beds and later on steel beds. Sometimes they were coated in a white or other color, but usually white enamel. Other times they were left metal. And hollow, so they were light, easy to move. Also easy to move because they were on casters, so you could just slide them around. And if you're looking at an old Sears catalog or other furniture catalog and see something listed as sanitary something, like a sanitary desk or a sanitary dresser, and you're not sure why, chances are it's on casters, and that's why people attach that term to it, just to make it easier to move and then to clean. Sometimes it can resemble hospital furniture a little bit, but not all of it had to. And another development around this era was the shift to built-in closets, which, if you've been in historic homes, a lot of them don't have built-in closets. The Stowe house I was very excited the first time I visited and saw the built-in closets, but if you've seen them, they're pretty shallow. And so a lot of times when there were closets, they were shallow and there were hooks on the wall or pegs like you would find in Shaker dwellings. And that was, to hang your clothes on because people didn't have as many outlets as we have today. But the built-in closets became the norm moving forward because armoires with casters or without, they're heavy, or the standalone wardrobes. So just having everything and being able to close the door and then not have to move it to clean was favorable. So yes, if you live in a house with few closets or no closets, it's probably before then. So also, I want to touch on the sick room in a house. Christina mentioned that I have been here in Cincinnati doing a fellowship at the Lloyd Library, and my focus there has been on bedrooms and sick rooms. And so I didn't want to just talk about my research there, but it was something that Catherine wrote about as well. And prior to coming here, she was the person I would reference most frequently when talking about the design of a sick room. So when we talk about a sick room, we're talking about a room with many different purposes. And again, this having a separate room that you can dedicate to, when someone gets sick is a privilege. It's not something that every household had. And it's part of the reason that Catherine advocates for having a screen where you can create different rooms. That way you can at least segregate the person a little bit from the rest of the household. But a lot of the larger homes of the era had sick rooms that were used for many purposes. Isolating a sick person so as not to spread whatever illness they have to the rest of the family, and also so it's quiet for them. People also were put in a sick room if they were recovering from an injury, whether that was something like a broken leg or a wound, so not necessarily because they were contagious, but just because they needed to heal. It was also used for people with long-term chronic illnesses who just weren't getting better or probably wouldn't get better. Everything related to childbirth. So if somebody was put on bed rest before giving birth, they often would have been in a sick room, also placed to give birth and recover postpartum if that was an option. Convalescence. I get so excited because people used to let people get better after illness. It's a crazy concept that we've completely forgotten about, but there was, the idea that if you have, I guess speaking in today's terms, just because your 2-week course of antibiotics is over does not mean you're fully recovered, or just because you're out of sick days or flex days this quarter does not mean you're magically healed. So there was this idea that there was a period of time between the acute illness and full health when people just needed to rest and take it easy. And it's not like every part of society was able to convalesce at that time as well, because certain people had to return to their jobs, as is the case today, but that's just something that has seemingly disappeared from our culture. And as someone who is on not year 3, God, I'm starting year 4. I've had long COVID for 3 years now, and not that I want to convalesce for 3 years, but it's nice to see that that we had a different view of getting better after having a serious illness, and having that space to do it. What else? Elder care. If you had a sick parent, sick relative, they would also go in the sick room. And end-of-life care. If someone was on their way out, that might be a place to put them. Depending on the culture, there might be some aspect of visitation connected with that before the removal and moving them downstairs to the parlor or somewhere else. So a sick room had many different purposes. These are 2 pictures from the Hancock Shaker Village in Massachusetts. I am very impressed with their design and furniture related to caring for the sick. On the picture on the left, you have in the back a hospital bed, sort of a hospital bed, but a 4-poster bed with a screen or a curtain that you could pull to close off sick people if you had multiple people in the same room who had infectious illnesses. I think that white thing, nope, that's just a towel. One of the other beds, there's like a little shelf that comes out from the side of the bed that you can pull out for resting your leg if you have a broken leg. My favorite of all of the furniture is on the right, the adult cradle. It fits an adult, or at least an adult at that time, and me. And the bottom has, wide pieces of wood, so someone could sit in the chair next to it and rock their person with their foot. And that just sounds so soothing when you're really sick, just to have someone rock you to sleep and have it be acceptable to be an adult in a cradle. Lots of good things. Yes, next. This is very text heavy, we won't go over everything, but people had a lot of opinions about what does and does not belong in a sick room and how to set it up. You want a pleasant view for the sick person, so you ideally want the bed to face a window. You don't want the bed to be against a wall because you want another person to be able to make the bed and get around all the different sides. You, of course, want to maximize ventilation and airflow. Natural light is great. If you're not going to paint it white, which might feel a little sterile for somebody who is going to be in there for an extended period of time, other light, bright colors that are cheerful might help. Again, minimizing clutter, but also keeping it interesting because this person's going to have to look at the walls, so give them something to look at. I believe it was Catherine who suggested switching things up in the sick room. So occasionally just moving, the furniture a little bit or pictures just to kind of give the person in the bed something a little different to look at. Minimizing sound. So if doors were creaky, if floorboards were creaky, tending to them so that didn't disturb the sick person. Another Cincinnati connection there, the Red Cross Shoe Company came out with their noiseless shoes, marketed mostly towards hospital workers, so people could go around quietly. Not fragrancing the rooms to cover up bad odors was recommended because you don't know what's going to make that person sick. On the right, we have a list of items that Catherine thinks belongs in every sick room. So a small tea kettle, a saucepan, a pail of water, for drinks and for washing, a pitcher, bowls, plates, glasses, spoons, towels, a broom, a slop bucket, and to have everything handy to minimize commotion and noise for the sick person. And we talk about, it seems like something that's out of date talking about these domestic housekeeping manuals, but we're still really into home improvement advice and household advice. There are entire media companies built just on that and TV channels. And so sometimes I like to feel that I, in some ways, am trying to carry on the legacy of Catherine and some of the other women. The next one. So I write a lot of service journalism and how-to articles and things, and so here's I'm not a teen, but I'll write for Teen Vogue. I'm not a parent, and yet write for Scary Mommy. So that's where I feel I really channel Catherine. So this type of work lives on in different forms. So yes, and I think we're almost to the end. So thank you to the Harriet Beecher Stowe House. It's been wonderful. I got to see the updates. It was wonderful. And thank you to the Lloyd Library for helping me with all this research and everything. I'm sorry for all of this and my bad eyes. And I think the last one, yes, if you need to find me, I have a weird name. I'm easy to find. Thank you. Oh, questions, my goodness. Oh, sorry.
Can you hear me? Okay, so we're going to do some questions and answers now. If you're in the audience here, raise your hand and I will bring you the mic, and then so that people online can hear as well your question. If you're watching online, type the question into the chat feature, so we'll be monitoring that and can ask them as well. We did have a comment in the chat earlier saying, ew, to the old rags in your mattress.
That was the good mattresses. Yes, hello.
I was wondering if any of Catherine Beecher's works are currently in print, particularly in Cincinnati, any Cincinnati libraries, or are they only digital available?
I only use the digital copies. I know you can find original books online for a lot of money, but I don't know. That's a good question. You might know, Christine. Sorry.
We have a couple of copies of Treatise of Domestic Economy, maybe just one, that we use kind of as a reference book, but really the best way to find them that I have found is to go onto a used books website and just see if there's something available. But is anybody else aware of other? I don't know that it's in print, so to speak, but, okay, yeah, I'm not sure. All right, other questions? Yes, coming.
Thank you, that was very interesting. I wondered if in your research you learned anything about the history of linen closets. Was there anything that came about due to sanitation?
Most closets were put in to have somewhere to store things. Wash day was a really big deal. Typically Monday for a lot of women of the era before washing machines, it would take an entire day. And you don't want your clean linens out somewhere, or you worked hard to get them clean. So I would imagine that storing them somewhere special, like a linen closet, and somewhere accessible, either typically in a hallway, sometimes in a bathroom, although bathroom might be a little dicey because of the humidity. But yeah, I absolutely think that there are sanitary reasons for that.
Thank you. Other questions? Looky. Okay, Fred's got one.
Well, this is more of a comment than a question. You had a picture of Catherine Beecher's layout for in the kitchen, and I read a year or two ago a book about the history of the Hoosier kitchen, and she was credited with being one of the forerunners of the Hoosier cabinet, which you showed but didn't discuss. So that's what you discussed, everything else.
No, you are absolutely right. And so the Hoosier cabinet, one of their taglines and one of their big selling points was minimizing steps. They have whole brochures that break down the number of steps that a woman takes when making a lemon pie. For some reason, that's an example that's used a lot. And yeah, you're absolutely right. That Catherine came before that, and other people were doing that as well. Later on, the Frankfurt kitchen was also designed for efficiency, but yeah, this idea of steps, every step you take is less free time for yourself as a woman. So when you make homes or kitchens especially more efficient, you're giving yourself time to relax, time to breathe. Probably you won't because something else will come up, but hypothetically. And so here I use this ad because they address the servant problem. So you don't have a servant in your house anymore, the Hoosier cabinet can come to your rescue and have everything that is accessible and visible and will cut down on the steps you have to take around the kitchen. So yeah, she pops up a lot once you start getting into this kind of niche era. Because she was writing about these things so far ahead of a lot of other people that, yeah, you do see her work creeping up. Thank you so much for mentioning that.
My mother has a Hoosier cabinet in her pantry / utility room, etc. And I am really under the impression that I'm going to inherit it one day, but I don't have any clue where I'm going to put it. But someday I will own a Hoosier cabinet. Any other questions? Kelly, do we have any in the chat?
We don't, but we have some comments about
Okay, I'm gonna come so you can just say it out loud.
Oh.
just a compliment, love the slide design, and then some folks agreed. And I felt the same way, so I was glad that came up.
Thank you. I spent a lot of time on it. I'm glad it worked. I'm a visual person, so I learn better when I see things like that, so I want to do that.
Okay, we do have another question here from Marie.
I found it fascinating, both the slides, the information, and I was wondering if you have any particular areas of interest moving forward in terms of your research.
So I have been slowly making my way through the house. So we started with the bathroom has been my main focus. You can probably tell my face lights up when I talk about the plumbing and everything. But that was what I've been working on for the past month here. I haven't had a chance to dive into bedrooms and sick rooms. And so now it's kind of up to me to put everything together into my very, very, very overdue book proposal. Yeah, that's kind of, kitchens are probably the next one, but because so many people have written about kitchens, I feel like I have less to contribute there. Yeah.
Well, I personally am
Ooh.
curious, having traveled abroad. I know there's some connections with Loose Women or whatever, why we don't have bidets in the U.S. as standard equipment. However, much of the world has drains in their bathrooms, which seems to me extremely utilitarian, and I don't get why we don't have them here. And I also really like the idea of wet roofs. And, you know, thank God we're past the shag carpet in the bathroom and
Yes.
the little toilet seat rugs and other things. But I still think we have a long way to go, and there are lessons to be learned, not only looking to the past, but from other cultures.
Yes. The carpeted bathrooms and carpeted toilet accessories come up very frequently. I kind of use that as a demarcation point. You know, when we stopped caring about hygiene in the bathroom, and we felt pretty confident in antibiotics and other treatments. But I found an ad the other day in a magazine from the 50s marketing chenille toilet covers, saying that it stops toilet sweat and it's more sanitary to have the chenille on your toilet. A moist, damp chenille that is absorbing your toilet sweat. And that's how they were marketing it. I was like, oh, this is fantastic. Yes, and I wrote an article for Architectural Digest maybe 2 months ago on bidets and all of that. So yes, it's a great topic. Sorry, yes.
I was going to ask, with the research on Catherine, and you're going to go onto the kitchen next, did she propose to use coal-fired stoves for cooking as opposed to wood-fired stoves?
I think she did.
Yeah, I thought so too.
That
it was more efficient again.
Yes, that I got into a little bit less. But yeah, she has a whole plan for the most efficient hearth and has guidance about if you have this many fireplaces, make sure you have this many windows. Oh, she also, sort of on topic, has, the more people in a room, the more ventilation you need, which is also something that is super relevant. But I think you're right about coal. I'd have to double check.
Yeah, I think, and just the whole cooking thing. Okay, that'd be interesting.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, we do have a question from the chat, so I'm going to let Kelly ask that for us.
When did this whole obsession or interest with homemaking start, and who may have bankrolled that advertising? And then a second comment to please reshare your website address.
Oh, sure. So before I forget, I will do that. It's just myname.com. So Elizabeth Yuko, YUKO.com is my website. I need to update it, but everything's there, except for I haven't updated. The homemaking question is in the sanitary marketing part, or more into like the 1950s?
Like who bankrolled this, the advertising of all of the sanitary equipment?
Oh, I mean, the companies that manufactured them. So, I mean, you have one right in town, P&G, certainly leaned into that. They may not have used germs and sanitation and because I looked at their ads specifically for this, and yeah, so it's companies like that are paying either advertising firms or in-house to really capitalize on. I mean, you had sanitary cigarette machines. You had sanitary everything. It is. Yeah, when you start going down a sanitary rabbit hole, well, I would love to see a sanitary rabbit hole.
Okay, we're going to do at least one more question here.
So I have this fun fact that's kind of like rattling in my head, and I don't know exactly where I picked it up, but I heard or learned that women who were persecuted as witches back in that time frame were actually known to be very clean, and that's why they're portrayed as with brooms. So I was curious if your research brought you that far back.
Oh, no, it hasn't. But that is plausible. But I'm sure I would have been a bit witch for a million different reasons. But yeah, that would make sense because Yeah, it's annoying to have to be clean or make other people be
Exactly,
clean.
exactly.
That's naggy. You don't want to, women.
Well, this has been a wonderful topic, a wonderful turnout, and et cetera. So thank you so much to Dr. Yuko, and thank you to our wonderful audience, both here and online. We have a full slate of lectures, discussion groups, and specialty tours planned for 2023 as the house restoration at the Harriet Beecher Stowe House continues through the interior. We're also increasing our engagement and education throughout the community. So check out our website, stowehousecincy.org, to check on updates and to book a speaker, etc. We'll hang out for a little while in the atrium for a more informal chat. I think the donation box is still out there. I think there's still some snacks, so help yourself. And thank you very much.
Thank you.